The 1930s was the golden age of British dance bands. There were giants abroad in the land in those days, filling the airwaves, the gramophones and the variety theatres with a stream of melody. Roy Fox, Jack Payne, Henry Hall, Lou Stone, Ambrose. They and their bands were household names. And up there with the best of them was Jack Hylton. Jack's personal archive of press cuttings, scripts, programmes, records and tapes is now housed at Lancaster University. And during the next hour we'll be drawing on that archive and the BBC's own archive to recall and assess the band that Jack built and to discover how his legacy is being preserved thanks to the unique retrieval activities of one man. In 1955, Jack, long since embarked on his second career as an impresario, briefly reassembled the band to recreate his early broadcasting days for the BBC programme Scrapbook for 1924, introduced by Freddie Griswold.
Come into the studio at 2LO Savoy Hill. It's a sort of padded cell, heavily draped. A notice on the wall warns us, if you cough, you will deafen thousands. And here is the band, one of the most famous show bands of all time. Its conductor, a bouncing little Lancashireman who is billed as Britain's King of Rhythm, Jack Hylton. And here, 30 years later, is Jack Hylton. A grey-haired Jack Hylton now, and of course he's long since given up dance band conducting to become a showman in a very big way. But just for this scrapbook we persuaded him to reform his band exactly as it was in those early days. It's not much like a modern dance band, and the first difference I noticed, Jack, is the banjo here.
Yes, we still had a banjoist in 1924. It was a sort of survival of the old-time jazz bands. You see, dance music was in a very interesting state of transition at that time, halfway from jazz band to the modern dance orchestra.
And I suppose Paul Whiteman's orchestra in America had a big influence on this revolution in popular music.
Oh, indeed it had. I remember how astonished we were by his gramophone records when they first came over here. When I started my band in 1924, it was my ambition to make the same sort of success on this side of the Atlantic.
Exciting days, eh?
They certainly were. A new band, a new style of playing, the new radio to help us put it on the map.
And you also made a lot of gramophone records.
Yes, they sound very tinny now. That's because electrical recording hadn't been invented. We had to play in a tin horn in the recording studio, and it was always a horrible squash getting near enough to it.
Well, now, with your 1924-style band here in the studio, you can show us what it really sounded like.
Well, that's the idea. There are 12 players, and you'll notice that there's only one violin. It's mostly wind instruments. There are 4 saxophones, 2 trumpets, and a trombone.
Oh, and I see with great affection a long-lost friend at the back there, the big brass horn swaying over the band.
Oh, the sousaphone. It was always such fun with its oompa, like a performing elephant at a circus.
All right, Jack, bring on the circus. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, Jack Hylton is going to turn round and conduct the band in one of the hit tunes of 1924. In fact, as we used to say in those days, Jack's back.
Keep your tail up, keep your tail up, keep your tail up. Oh, horsey, keep your tail up. Why don't you make it rise? Tell me how you get that way. You mean yes and say nay, nay. Oh, horsey, keep your tail up, keep the sun out of my eyes.
Jackson Greenhalgh Hylton was born in the Great Lever district of Bolton on the 2nd of July, 1892. He entered the musical world as a boy soprano with the Seaside Pierrot troupe. He was billed as the singing mill boy. After an apprenticeship as cinema organist, nightclub pianist, songwriter, musical arranger and band member, he formed his own band in 1924. Here's Jack himself with his band singing Shepherd of the Hills in 1927.
Shepherd of the hills, I hear you calling. Shepherd of the hills, when twilight falls, I seem to picture the black sheep returning. I miss the fold and my poor heart is yearning for the daffodils and crimson clover. By the rocks and rills I long to roam back to the near ones and dear ones who love me. Shepherd of the hills, I'm coming home.
The ubiquity of popular music in interwar Britain was the direct result of a combination of technological advances, systematic commercialisation, and a growing consumer culture geared to entertainment and recreation. Jack energetically exploited every medium available. Gramophone records. He made 1,700 in 19 years. The wireless, although Jack made less use of it than some of his contemporaries. And even films. Jack and the band starred in She Shall Have Music in 1935 and Bandwagon in 1940. Here's Sam Coster with the title song of She Shall Have Music.
She shall have music wherever she goes, with plenty of rhythm to tickle her toes. Wherever she goes, she shall have music. She shall have songbirds to sing her to sleep, with plenty of dream birds to count on the sheep, awake or asleep. She shall have music, and while she's dreaming, I'll write a dream song, and I'll be hoping that it will be our theme song. She shall have church bells to ring out in rhyme, so we can go marching in honeymoon time. She shall have music wherever she goes.
But most of all, Jack Hylton's was a touring show band, arguably Britain's premier show band. It's been estimated that in 1929 alone, Jack and the band gave 700 performances and travelled 63,000 miles. What was life like in the Hylton band in those years? Singer Leslie Saroni, talking to Neb Walters in 1973.
We used to go on the continent. I went all over the continent with him. And it was fantastic, the reception they used to get. And if you just connected with Jack Hylton's band, you know, people would almost bow. It really was marvellous. He was a great band leader. He knew what he wanted. Dynamic he was too. Most of his men were Philharmonic men, that sort of thing, you know. Pogson was very famous, wonderful man. And many of them now are famed for their own band. Billy Turnant, he was with Jack. Billy played every instrument in the band. When I say played, you know, I don't mean just got by. He really played it. And of course, a magnificent arranger too. Hugh Rignall, he used to be Jack's second fiddle. He'd probably murder me if he would say this, but it's true. Look what he became. Paul Finley, another, he used to be Jack's trombonist. Peter York, another great musician, great arranger. And my pal Sonny Farrar, great banjoist. He was with him. And Sonny had his own band as well. Oh, in and out of them. Jack Jackson was with him. It was a great band.
At times, there was more than one Jack Hylton band. Certainly in 1935 to 36 when Jack was in America, and again in 1940 after the outbreak of the war. Jack Hylton Jr., although born in 1947, long after the dissolution of the band, recalls the complex organisation involved.
There'd be one in a club in London, one in Bristol doing recordings, one touring. Yeah. It was a big organisation going. They had full shows with them. There were sets and scenery and costumes and entertainers and wardrobe mistresses and librarians, and it really was like putting up a small building at times, apparently. My understanding of it is that, for instance, the orchestra that did a lot of broadcasting from Bristol was almost the exclusive responsibility of Bill Turnant. Now, you wouldn't find a better musician or a better organiser than Bill Turnant wherever you went. Obviously, Jack Hylton was responsible, it was his name, and Bill was answerable to him. But if you trust the person who's looking after the enterprise for you, then it makes life an awful lot easier.
Life begins at Oxford Circus when the busy day is done. We don't care how much they work us, just as long as we have fun. Off with your old clothes and on with your best. Just take a girlfriend to be your guest and come up west. Your life begins at Oxford Circus when the busy day is done.
Billy Turnant as vocalist there in Life Begins at Oxford Circus, recorded in 1935. Eddie Poehler was one of the substitute conductors, as he told Steve Allen in 1974.
Although I'm musical and play and can write, I've never had any training in the sense of a musical conductor. And he went away, he wanted to go away for 7 weeks to America, and he said, I've got these engagements, will you come and conduct the band? I said, well, now that's ridiculous, Jack, I can't conduct. Well, he said, stand up in front of it. I said, well, that's all right. And Billy Turnant, who was Jack's right hand and left hand with regard to all the arrangements of music, he said, it's all right, Eddie. He said, we'll beat off, and you just watch the beat 1, 2 with somebody's foot, and then follow us. And I said, well, that's all right. Jack was doing that for 20 years, so why can't I, you see? So we had a big laugh about it, and that's what we did. And, of course, the Melody Maker or something had a big headline, Eddie Poehler waves his arms, because that's exactly what I did. But it was fun.
Band member Chappie D'Amato recalls Jack Hylton's conducting style.
We had a job at the Grafton Galleries. Jack got off the piano, he was playing the piano, and I said, look, stand up like Whiteman doesn't conduct the band. He was a bit shy in those days, Jack. You know, he'd always been sitting at the piano, and he was a little shy. I said, go on, stand up. And that's why he never used a baton, because at that time he hadn't got one, and he just stood up in front of the band. And I said, leave it to us, we'll play, you know, you conduct us, you know. And he conducted with his hands. And that's why Jack was the first one who ever, I think, conducted with his hands. That's why you get that picture of him, Jack's back.
Button up your overcoat when the wind is free. Take good care of yourself, you belong to me. Eat an apple every day, go to bed by 3. Take good care of yourself, you belong to me. Be careful crossing streets, ooh, don't eat meats, ooh, cut out sweets, ooh, you'll get a pain-a-roo in your tum-tum. Keep away from bootleg hooch when you're on a spree. Take good care of yourself, you belong to me.
Button Up Your Overcoat, sung by Sam Brown with Chappie D'Amato on guitar, recorded in 1929. Peter Faint, who drew on the Hylton archive to undertake a master's degree at Lancaster University, points to Jack's ability to talent spot.
It was something he became sort of legendary for. I mean, it was not so much the case that he would hire the famous musicians. He would hire young musicians who would go on to become names in their own right. There's a man who I spoke to shortly before he died, Billy Munn, who was playing for Jack Hylton when he was 20. Playing in the biggest venues in Europe, the best shows, and obviously with what I would say would be the best band. And sort of 60 years later, he was still playing and had spent all that time being a successful musician. And obviously, Hylton had seen something in him. He knew he was going to be a good guy. He was a piano player. Alec Templeton went on to be famous for all sorts of reasons, but obviously mostly his piano playing. Claude Ivy was a big name who he'd had in the band. The arrangers were really who went on to do big things. Billy Ternant became a very successful band leader, arranger, musician. Jack Jackson was in this band, and he went on to big things as a musician and as a broadcaster. Hugo Rignold was a guy who went on to big things orchestrally. But of course the singers were massive. Singers like Bruce Trent, Sam Brown, Pat O'Malley, Leslie Saroni, these people who were massive names during that era and afterwards, and all people who were used and sort of nurtured by Jack Hylton.
All of me, why not take all of me? Oh, can't you see, I'm no good without you. Take my lips, I want to lose them. Take my arms, I'll never use them. Your goodbye left me with eyes that cry. How can I go on, dear, without you? You took the part that once was my heart, so why not take all of me?
Hylton discovery Pat O'Malley singing All of Me, recorded in 1932. Ernie Wise was another of Jack's discoveries.
Well, what happened was that when I was living in a place called Ardsley, near Wakefield, I gave an audition to Brian Mickey at the Empire Theatre, Leeds, and he was very impressed by what I did. I was doing comedy in those days. And he took me down to London, and I gave an audition to Jack Hylton, who immediately took to me. I think it was because I had the same type of background as him. And he put me into a show at the Princess Theatre called Bandwagon and Jack Hylton's Band. This was in 1939. I don't think the show was doing too well, but he gave me a terrific boost in the newspapers. It was Mr. Leeds Comes to Town, and I absolutely got front page everywhere, all over the country, doing this little comedy act that I did then, when I used to dance in clogs and wear a little bowler and a little moustache, a little bit Chaplinish. And then Jack Hylton gave me a contract, paid me £6 a week, fixed me up with a matron who used to sort of look after me. She was looking after two other girls as well, so I had it made. What I remember about Jack was that I called him Mr. Hylton. He gave me my name to start with. My full name is Ernest Wiseman, and he cut it back to Ernie Wise. The other faction that he did, whether this was good or bad, I don't know. He took me away more from, shall we say, North Country comedy, which was this clogs and a cut-down evening dress suit, and a little tash and a little cut-down bowler, rather like George Roby's type of bowler. And he put me into evening dress, white coat, straw hats and things like that. And I moved from let's have a tiddly at the milk bar and knee-deep in daisies to things like Run Rabbit Run and nice people with nice manners. I think he had an idea. Was we going to become a little more sophisticated?
Jack put as much energy into his private life as he did into his public life. His first wife, Ennis Parks, was a singer and band leader in her own right.
Hello, everybody. This is Mrs. Jack Hylton speaking. Gives the boys and myself great pleasure to record for the first time on Crown Records. And here is In the Little Gypsy Tea Room. I do hope you'll like it.
She and Jack were married from 1914 to her death in 1957. But during that time, he had a succession of affairs. The product of one of these liaisons was Jack Hylton Jr.
My mum was a singer, a stage performer. She'd been a vocalist with Jack Harris in his band for a number of years. And she'd done West End theatre, she'd done radio broadcasts. Her professional name was Pat Taylor. And she did some shows for Jack, and seemed to be quite successful at it. And they formed a relationship which lasted for a period of time, and I appeared on the scene. And when it was time for that relationship to finish, I guess it finished. But I never felt any major animosity between him and her, or between him and any of the other ladies. They all seemed to remain extraordinarily fond of him. It was a trick which, had I been of his persuasion, I would love to have mastered. He seemed to be lionized for the sorts of things that a lot of other people get nailed to the wall for. He seemed to be very good at that. Ladies arrived and ladies left, and I'm sure for a brief period of time when the relationship ended, there was animosity there, but it never seemed to last too long. He was a hugely entertaining man. It's very hard for me to judge, of course, because being his son, you have a sort of unequivocal love. But I have been told that he was immensely charming, and the thing that was important about it was a genuine charm, not a contrived charm.
Although influenced by American hot jazz, British band music was better described as sweet music. In an article he wrote for the Gramophone magazine in 1927, Jack argued that hot jazz did not appeal to the British public. It needed to be softened, sweetened, and anglicised. He wrote, "Symphonic syncopation, which I feel proud to have developed in this country, is preeminently British. In the dance halls and on the gramophone record alike, it makes a subtle appeal to our British temperament, and is fast becoming a truly national music." It was this approach which led to Jack being described as the British Paul Whiteman.
You're the cream of my coffee, you're the salt in my stew. You will always be my necessity, I'd be lost without you. You're the starch in my collar, you're the lace in my shoe. You will always be my necessity, I'd be lost without you. Most men tell love tales and each phrase dovetails. You've heard each known way, this way is my own way. You're the sail of my love boat, you're the captain and crew. You will always be my necessity, I'd be lost without you.
You're the Cream in My Coffee, sung by Sam Brown, recorded in 1929, and a prime example of Jack's symphonic syncopation. Along with the romantic ballads and swing numbers, one of the continuing appeals of the band lay in topicality. The full range of Hylton recordings provides an illuminating insight into the contemporary fads, fashions, events and celebrities of interwar Britain. In 1930, Amy Johnson became a national heroine when she flew solo from Croydon to Darwin in Australia, a flight of 19.5 days. She was immediately celebrated by Jack and the band in a song, Amy, Wonderful Amy, sung by Pat O'Malley and complete with aircraft noises. It was recorded a mere 10 days after she landed in Australia.
There's a little lady who has captured every heart, Amy Johnson, it's you. We have watched and waited since the day you made your start, Amy Johnson, it's true. Since the news that you are safe has come along, everyone in town is singing this love song. Amy, wonderful Amy, how can you blame me for loving you? Since you've won the praise of every nation, you have filled my heart with admiration. Amy, wonderful Amy, I'm proud of the way you flew. Believe me, Amy, you cannot blame me, Amy, for falling in love with you. She's landed at Vienna.
years at Baghdad. Now she's over Karachi. Splendid. She's reached Port Darwin. Bravo. She's off again. She's off to Brisbane. Here she comes, here comes. Something wrong. Good gracious, what's wrong? She's crashed. No, she's safe.
Amy, wonderful Amy, how can you blame me for loving you?
Since you've won the praise of every nation, you have filled my heart with admiration.
White Cargo had been a sensational book and a hit West End stage play in the 1920s before it reached the cinema screen in 1929. It was the story of a jungle temptress, Tondaleo, who demoralises and ruins a succession of stiff upper-lip young Englishmen on a rubber plantation in West Africa. Tondaleo became a popular symbol of forbidden love and exotic allure. She was celebrated in this song from the band, sung by Sam Brown in 1929.
Jungle flower, tell me, Tondaleo, what is your power? Although I may resist you, break your magic spell, you or fate, draw me back again, back to days of gladness, for you are there, back to nights of madness. What do I care? Although I know I hate you, hating as I do, Tondaleo, I love you.
At the opposite end of the moral spectrum, Jack Hylton and the band contributed to the 50th anniversary celebrations in 1933 of the Boys' Brigade, with a song Sure and Steadfast, inspired by the brigade motto. The 1920s and 1930s were the decades of health and beauty, keep fit, and slimming, at least among the well-to-do who could afford to starve themselves. The slimming craze was satirised in My Wife is on a Diet, sung by Leslie Saroni in 1929.
What's the greatest problem now throughout the land? What's the only problem needs a helping hand? It isn't Philip Snowden or tax relief I find. It's something more important now on everybody's mind. Just walk into any home today. It's 10 to 1, you'll hear each husband say, my wife is on the diet, and since she's on the diet, home isn't home anymore. No gravy or potatoes, just lettuce and tomatoes. Where are the pies I adore? Oh, 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 what a disgrace. I'm ashamed to look a grapefruit straight in the face. My wife is on the diet, and since she's on the diet, I'm losing a pound every day. Monday, grapefruit, breakfast and for dinner, and at night some orange juice. Tuesday, grapefruit, boys, I'm growing thinner, all my clothes are getting loose. Wednesday, Thursday, I feel satisfied, then I change to coffee with the grapefruit on the side. Friday till Sunday, it's more than I can stand. Before the 18th day, I'll have a lily in my hand.
The highlight of 1935 was the Silver Jubilee of King George V. There was widespread national rejoicing, and the King was genuinely astonished at the warmth of the affection in which he was held. All the bands recorded Jubilee numbers. The contribution of Jack's band was Gentleman the King, sung by Stanley Holloway.
The crowds are congregating, all the men in line are waiting for the show. 100,000 cheers are heard, the men are waiting for the word to go. The band is saying now it won't be long. Wait until you hear the starting song. Eyes right, eyes good. We are all singing along and we're singing this song. Gentlemen, the King. The crowds in the street round the tramp of our feet. Gentlemen, song-ding. And if the army, the navy, the boys in the sky shout, are you downhearted? No, we reply, we are marching along and we are singing this song. Gentlemen, the King.
Jack toured not only in Britain, but on the continent. There were 16 European tours between 1927 and 1938, and he and the band were enormously popular in both France and Germany. Singer June Marlowe, speaking in 1975, recalled her experiences with the band in Germany.
Well, he saw me singing in a nightclub. I think it was called the Coconut Grove. And he was in one night and he said, would I like to join his band? And I said, well, certainly, because by then he was a very big name and had been for years, and I was delighted to be asked. Unfortunately, I couldn't get out of the contract in time, so actually what happened was he did get me out of the contract, but not in time to do anything with him in England, and I flew straight to Berlin and opened with the band at the Scala Theatre in Berlin, which was a tremendous experience because in those days we sat on the bandstand through the whole show, the singers, and I've never heard anything like it when he struck up Oh Listen to the Band and the tabs opened. I've never heard anything like the thunderous applause he got. Then, of course, I realised he was like sort of God in pre-war Germany. Absolute God he was. And we were treated the same because we were with the band, which was very nice, feted and given presents and everything everywhere. And we toured around Germany, all the big cities, finishing up eventually in Leipzig for the famous fair. And then we were due to go on to Vienna, but unfortunately Hitler got there first, so we couldn't play there. So we came back to England and opened at the Hippodrome Birmingham instead, which was really a bit of a letdown, but still it was very nice.
Why doesn't somebody tell me these things, like 1 and 1 make 2 and 2 make love and love is blind? Why doesn't somebody tell me these things? I guess I'm supposed to guess when love is on your mind. You've got me all excited, looks like love has found me. You've got your arms around me, what am I supposed to do now? Oh, my mother never confided in me before I left her apron string. Why doesn't somebody tell me these things?
Jack and the band even recorded some songs in Germany. Here is Ich bin so scharf auf Erika, sung by Siegfried Arno.
Ich bin so scharf auf Erika, wie Kolumbus auf Amerika. Ich steig mit ihr ins Segelboot, dann fahren wir hinaus ins Abendrot. Ich zeige meiner Erika Europa und Amerika. Ich halte Wacht die Nacht bei Erika, bei meiner Erika, der süßen Erika. Wenn sie erwacht, dann lacht der Sonnenschein, das muss was Wunderbares sein.
But by the later 1930s, Germany was not an easy or comfortable place to be, as singer Harry Stanley told Michael Poynton in 1986.
I was asked to see the theatre director, Herr Duisberg. When I got to his office, a glance at the large table indicated why my presence was requested. It was covered with photographs of our featured performers, those to be framed for display outside the theatre and also in the foyer. He spoke very good English and was very polite. Mr. Stanley, I understand you saw our consul in London. He made suggestions in regard to Jewish personnel. Apparently Mr. Hylton chose to ignore them. I'm now told that you have arranged a finale that brings some of your stars into close proximity to the audience. I think it would be unwise to include those of very Semitic appearance. That could risk the possibility of some young, overzealous people showing their dislike of Jews in a mild way, something we want to avoid if possible. Ask politely, anybody in these photographs come into that category? Pointing to one of Peggy Dell, he said, this lady looks very Semitic. Peggy's jet black hair probably gave him that impression. Actually, she was a devout Roman Catholic. Anyone else? The harp player, he said, pointing to George Lyons, who was a swarthy, dark-haired American of Italian descent, another good Catholic. The accordionist looks very Jewish, he said, pointing to Joe Rossi, a dark-complexioned French lad who went to church every morning. It was so stupid I had to leave the room, ask where the toilet was, and made a hasty exit. If I'd stayed longer, I would have weed myself. We did the finale as I'd planned. Our show was, and particularly the so-called Semitic-looking artists, scored a huge success. Herr Duisberg's family, incidentally, manufactured armaments at an enormous factory at Duisburg, a town possibly named after them. They were typical of the big industrialists that helped Hitler to power.
Now, I believe you had your own special way to greet the Nazis under the circumstances. What happened with that?
Well, the point is that the fellows were asking me, it was very difficult. When you went to a policeman and asked him the time, before he uttered the word, he'd raise his right arm and say, Heil Hitler! And the fellow said to me, what do we do about it? I said, I know what I'm going to do. If anybody does that to me, you can do what you like. But if anybody does it to me, I will raise my hand and say, Heil Hylton. And we all did that, and it was never tumbled.
The rise of the Nazis led almost inevitably to the Second World War. And by 1940, Jack's band was losing so many of its members by call-up to the armed forces that he decided to dissolve it. But this was not the end of Jack Hylton. He embarked on a second career as a major theatre and television impresario, presenting everything from opera and ballet to musicals and pantomime. His career culminated in his presentation of Camelot at Drury Lane in 1964. Not long into the run of the show, he died on the 29th of January 1965. Jack Jr.
He'd had a heart attack 7 days before, and he'd been taken up to the London clinic. I'd been to see him in the morning. I got home, and I got a call saying I should get back to the London clinic quickly, and by the time I got back there it was too late anyway. He'd died. This makes me sound incredibly callous, and I went away and I had to rush in because it was a matinee day and I was working in the theatre. And I've been taught that those things are important, you know, turning up and doing the job. And I was working on Camelot, which was one of his shows. I was an assistant stage manager at the time. A very, very strange atmosphere in the theatre. Because, of course, halfway through Camelot, there's the scene where Lancelot brings one of the knights he's been jousting with and has killed. He brings him back to life. That was a very odd moment on stage, I have to say. And at the end of the evening performance, I walked out of the stage door to go home, and there was Val Parnell and his son there, and they said, "Come on, you're staying with us." I suppose the legacy really is greater for Jack Hylton, in that for the first time, I think, in this country, when he died, every London theatre switched the front of house lights out. Don't do that for fun. Do that for respect. I think he created success for a lot of musicians who wouldn't otherwise have had it. I mean, look down the list of the Hylton alumni. There's some big names there, people like Ted Heath and Jack Jackson and Bill Turnant and Cyril Ornadale and some of the people who went to the States. You know, it goes on and on and on. I don't know if there's one particular single legacy. I have a feeling that he would be terribly embarrassed that all this was still going on at the time, and I would think that he would just have thought that people enjoyed the music at the time, and it was at a time where people needed to enjoy themselves.
And so the program concludes, and here is Jack Hylton to say good night.
I hope you've all enjoyed our program this evening, ladies and gentlemen. My entertainers and myself thank you all for listening. Good night.